Hey everyone, hope you are doing well. Welcome back to another video here this week. In this video, we're going to be looking at the deep details of the version 1 Limitless versus the version 2 Limitless drivetrain. We're specifically going to be looking at the center section, the spool assembly, and see exactly what is the improvements for version 2 over version 1. And in my opinion, this is one of the areas where we see the biggest improvement for the version 2 Limitless. And that's why I believe this video is quite important to really show and exemplify why these changes are good. Let's dive right into it and look at the components that we have here on the table. On this side of the table, we have all the components that make up the drivetrain center section for the V2 Limitless. And on this side of the table, we have all the components that make up the assembly parts for our version 1 Limitless. So one of the biggest things that you'll see in terms of differences is the size of the actual center shaft, as well as the size of the drive dogs that send the power from the center section out to the front and the rear differentials. Biggest thing here for version 2 is you see both of these drive dogs, they are of the same exact length. This is a big change because we were having some issues with the version 1 for those guys who were traveling really fast with that radio controlled vehicle. You can see that there's a significant difference between the front drive shaft that runs to the front differential versus the drive dog here that goes to the rear differential. This guy is very long, and you can see the differences right on the table. I'll line all these up. So the front version 1 is smaller than the version 2. However, the version 1 dog bone type drive shaft here is so long in comparison to all the other shafts. And this is really what was the major issue with that section of the drivetrain. Having such a long drive shaft there made it so that when you reach a high amount of RPM, that drive dog would become unstable and start to flex at high speed, actually impacting part of the version 1 chassis components there that surround where this would go. So that was one big reason for Arrma to completely change the way that they lay the center section out. Now that's not the only way that they've been able to go and improve things by shortening this up. In order to shorten everything up, they had to make a significant change to the actual center shaft that the spool gear gets mounted to. So you can see the difference in length of this shaft. This is the version 1 shaft that we have, and this is the version 2. And both of these here are located at the rear. So you can see the big extension that we have on the version 2. This allows us to eat some of that room up in order to provide the drive shaft, the dog bone that sits here, to be so much smaller. And that's the way that this would actually be set up, in comparison of a setup that looks more like this in order to get to the same spot. So you can see the big massive difference there on how that would actually fit within the V1 versus V2 Limitless, where V2 is our center section that looks more like this. That is one significant change that has been done to the center section of the V2 Limitless. However, in order to get this change to work even better, there has been a major change on the actual gearing. So the gear that's provided for the V2 Limitless here is a 39-tooth spur or a 39-tooth spool gear. And on our V1, we had a 34. Now the reason why they had to go, and this is Arrma had to go and place a 39-tooth on the center drive shaft, on the center shaft, is because they actually changed the differential gear ratios. They did that so that all these components would be spinning at a much slower rate in comparison to your V1 components here. The importance of this change is that those V2 components, specifically the drive shafts here, are not going to be rotating as fast, meaning they will not be as unstable, even though they have been shortened. So this is just another area there that they've been able to beef up by slowing down the speeds of that center driveline section of the vehicle. Now we'll move into some of the details with the smaller components. We'll start here by looking at the drive dog couplers. So this is a drive dog coupler comparison of our V1 versus our V2. This gets mounted to a small section here on the V1 shaft, and there's a D shape so that the set screw is going to be able to be placed right on that flat section of the drive shaft. Now this works, however, this is a rather small diameter, which probably creates some sort of stress concentrations. Probably not a big deal and can handle the load. However, what is a big deal is that this set screw is essentially responsible for the positioning of the drive dog coupler on the shaft, where what they've done with the V2 is you have a complete hole drilled right through the center section here, and as well as our drive dog coupler. You could place this onto the shaft. It travels a much further distance along the shaft, making sure that it's nice and stable on the shaft with a very tight tolerance. And then you have a set screw that not only goes through the first part of the shaft, but it just about exits on the other side. And this is one of the things that has been a step up in the actual design difference between V1 and V2. And on the other side of the V2 shaft, you don't need anything because this is essentially built into that center section, which is something that looks all solid in its design. Both of the spool gears use the same idea of this single set screw that goes right through all the way to the other side. You can see there, that's the V2 setup, and here's the V1 where you can see that the fastener's sticking out on this side and it's inserted from that side of the shaft. The spool gear's connection to the main drive shaft is far superior using this type of technology, both found on V1 as well as V2. It does place these pins in double shear, allowing greater strength and allows a greater amount of torque transfer from the vehicle's motor to our drive shaft components. The spacers that are found on the version 2 as well as version 1, they are the same size. Here is the larger spacer. This guy is the smaller spacer. They are the same length, same diameter, and all of that. However, what has changed, and it is the last component that we're going to talk about here, is the bearing. The bearing on the V2 is a step up. Both bearings are of a sealed type. That means you can't actually see or physically make contact with the balls that are located on the inner side of this bearing. However, V2 uses more of like a rubber seal as compared with the version 1, which uses a metal seal. One fact that I was able to pull from all the information that I was looking at was that this bearing used in the V2 with the rubber seal is actually used in other manufacturers' bearings for their radio control car. This is good news because it does show us that this bearing is the one being selected for other manufacturers' radio controlled vehicles. It tells us and gives us the confidence to know that this bearing's got to work for the application that it's been designed for. And since the RPM that this main shaft is going to spin on the V2 versus the V1, it's even going to be an easier task for that bearing as the RPMs are going to be slower on that main drive shaft. So all of these things are good news for our components here. Once you take all those components and you assemble them, one key note is that the V2 Limitless has the assembly for the center drive shaft section sitting further back in the vehicle as compared with the version 1. And you can see that here on the table when you compare against the V2 front section, the front drive shaft versus the V1 front drive shaft, where the V2 is longer than the V1. So it's not a direct replacement if you go and buy all the parts for your version 2 center drive shaft and try to place that in the V1. You will have to relocate that center shaft and that center drive shaft assembly, and I don't think that's going to be so easy as the chassis plate does look like it changed as well. Well guys, that pretty well does it for this video. Like the video if you do. Don't forget to hit that sub button so that I can see you guys in the next video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.